All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Vivek sir, for giving this opportunity. Uh, Really, because of such an opportunity, I really had to work a lot. I had mentioned to you. So yesterday, I worked for around 9 hours, basically to prepare for this presentation, 9, 10 hours. And before that, before I went to the hospital, I also did, invest quite a lot of time. Thank you all skill hubbers and beyond, all the new faces, those who have joined in today. Thank you so much. It's as sir said, we don't keep it that formal. We have a chit chat. It's a free flowing chit chat. So feel free to communicate, and I'll try to do my best to stand up to your expectations. So what do we mean when we say competencies? What comes to your mind if some participation, voluntary participation? What comes to your mind when the term competencies is spoken before you?
I think skill set comes like when I
skill set. Okay. Yeah. Anyone else?
Competences are basically competition between the skills could be. Which one is the best? Which one should come on top?
Okay. So Shmita wants to participate. Yeah, please.
Like the commanding skill set
skills and attributes, right?
Yes.
Okay. Satnam, ma'am, you want to participate?
I just want to try my luck if I know this or not. So I think competencies is a defined requirement of an employee's profession, behavioral and as well as functional. So there are certain skill sets that an employee requires. And in Hindi, we call it, I think, dakshata, because that's the word I commonly use, that whether you are, how much daksh you are in something to be able to do a job. So I think that's what.
Yeah. So the key was actually the behavioral aspects, which rightly Satnam Madam expressed it. So if we go to the next slide, I have made it more clear. So let us go back to the 1980s or the pioneers in the field of competencies. If you see the definition, so one of the classic definitions, an underlying characteristic of an individual that is causally related to effective or superior performance in a job. So we are basically keeping
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Are you showing the presentation? Because I can only see the slide where all the presentations are saved. Your desktop.
I think your presentation is not yet started.
Yeah, you'll have to stop the reshare and then reshare again.
Is it visible?
Yeah.
Okay, I want to take you back to the 1980s, the pioneers basically who had talked about competencies at that point of time. So this is a very important definition, which I felt that's why I picked it up. An underlying characteristic. I've made the word in, I've made it bold. Underlying is the bold word here, because this is one area of competencies where we really need to dig deeper. Competencies, for that matter, the behavioral aspects are not readily observable. So that is why the definition itself clarifies it, that these are the underlying characteristics. When we say characteristics, it can be the traits, it can be the motives, it can be the attributes, it can be the features, and so on. Basically, the underlying characteristics of an individual that is causally related. Now, these characteristics have a correlation with performance, and we are concerned about superior performance in a job, because it is the performance which will be the competitive advantage in between different organizations. The difference between the progressive organizations and not so progressive organizations, or the laggards, if I may call it that way, would be performance, right? So performance is basically a combination of the skill sets, as you rightly say, Satnam ma'am, about the knowledge aspect and about the entire behavioral aspects. Now, when we say the behavioral aspects, it's like, again, a sea of things those are involved. That is why as we move further, we'll get to know what it includes. Now, again, there is another definition which I picked up, where you can see competency is a set of demonstrable characteristics. The keyword here I've highlighted is demonstrable, because it is not obvious and it is not seen easily. That is why those are demonstrable, and where those things get demonstrated, those things get demonstrated in the behavior of people. That is why once we move further, we will get to know how we basically pick up those behaviors examples of such behaviors, and we will see how we are actually quantifying those behaviors on a scale, and then we are doing an analysis and basically deriving the results. So the idea is basically, because of the unseen stuff, if the metaphor of the iceberg is very frequently used, under the waterline, a lot of those behavioral traits are there, and it's a sea again within a sea, if I may say so. And that is why it is important to remove or reduce as much as possible the element of subjectivity that's present in behavioral aspects. The skills, basically you conduct a test and then you get the results. The knowledge aspect, you run a test and you get to know where the person stands as far as how deep the knowledge is. But once it comes to behavioral aspects, there can be a lot of ifs and buts. That is why we talk about situations, we talk about simulations, and we talk about practical stuff. We expose them to those areas, so we try to bring in those situations from their work life and see what kind of competencies get demonstrated. Once those competencies are demonstrated, we try to put them on a scale and analyze those, how strongly those competencies are prevalent in their work life, and then we basically take decisions related to promotion, succession planning, and all those stuff. So that is one thing. Another word that I've highlighted is the inherent, because knowledge is something which, basically, as I said, gets reflected through a usual test which is conducted, maybe through personal interviews. We get to know the depth of knowledge on a particular topic, on a particular domain. When it comes to skills also, I've given you an example. But all these behavioral aspects, as here it is clearly written, there are certain inherent qualities in every individual. Somebody is very, very compassionate, somebody is very kind, somebody is very aggressive. So based on the mix of these kind of attributes, which are basically hidden, which are basically inside an individual, which usually do not get reflected. And let me tell you, during interviews also, people try to fake a lot. And that is why usually, it is also said that people are smart enough when it comes to their quality at interviews. People are also smart enough the way they present themselves, and then basically they try to outsmart sometimes. So that is why, not going by a regular dialogue between an interviewer and an interviewee, it is important to pick up situations and try to bring out those inherent and hidden qualities within an individual, so that again we try to relate with the job specs. We try to relate with the competencies for a particular role. For example, a particular role requires a lot of risk taking. Now we have to frame the questions in such a way that the person demonstrates a behavior, maybe from his past work life, or maybe through a practical assessment center, the person actually shows the risk-taking ability. Once he displays the risk-taking ability, we basically can say now that we have the right fit for the particular role. So that is why it's an interesting discovery, and it is an interesting area, a challenging area to move into the hidden part, check it out, bring it out, and uncover the stuff which are all inside and which actually critically determine superior performance of employees in organizations. Now, this is the metaphor which is very frequently used, the iceberg model. Here, what happens is, you can see it's very clearly written, it is easy to be monitored, the skills and knowledge. You prepare a questionnaire, you prepare a set of questions, you test somebody on chemistry, you test somebody on physics, you test somebody on human resources. And as far as skills are concerned, basically, you can put them to certain tests. If it is a highly technical job, for example, you want to appoint a pilot, you can basically have those flying hours stuff with somebody and engineer the kind of projects he did. All those these are all easily available. These kind of tests are available. But when it comes to what kind of a person is the person in question, then if you see under the waterline, it's a huge area which is unclear, which is not readily observable. So it's also of particular interest to me, this subject, because it's a challenge, as I've mentioned at the top of it. It is a challenge to uncover and understand the human behavior. And human beings are so complex. they are having their own belief system, they are having their own value systems, they are having their own perceptions, they are having their own way of looking at things. So human beings, they are very complex, not necessarily the way they present during interviews. Basically, they are really that kind of a person when it comes to the situations, the challenging situations. And that is why it's an amazing area of interest, particular interest to me, competencies. It's a challenge to uncover the concealed, as I mentioned, the intangibles, the intrinsic stuff, the stuff which are hidden inside human beings, the innate qualities. Somebody is passionate. How do we know whether he faked his passion? Let us find examples from his practical work life. That's why, as we move forward, there's something called BEI, behavioral event interviews. That's one part of one of the competency tools, in fact, basically to dig out how competent a person is as far as those innate qualities are concerned. Covert attributes, a lot of attributes are not easily seen. So that is why we will touch upon all those intangibles in this particular session. It would really be interesting. Now, as I said, what basically make up the competencies. There are basically 5 elements which make up competencies. As we keep discussing, more commonly, if you ask people, knowledge and skills. And knowledge is basically, if I may use in very raw terms, people say it's basically the accumulation of information. And rightly so, dictionaries have defined it that way. Basically refers to information that the incumbent has acquired in certain content areas. Basically, because of some structured study, because of the environment experience, people gather some information, accumulate some domain knowledge. And skill is nothing but the ability to do something. That's why skill, whenever I think about skill, I think about verbs. Person can ride, person can drive. All these are examples of basically skills in action. So all action related stuff, those are skills. These are basically verbs. Okay. So knowledge and skill, which is usually discussed in most of the presentations, but competencies actually encompass beyond knowledge and skills. What are those? These are very, very sometimes even more critical in performance evaluations. Motives. And whenever we say motives, what is the intent of the person? Why does the person want to do this? Why does the person want to join us? Why does the person speak the way he speaks? So basically, as Varsha was also mentioning in one of her presentations, one day, what motivates Mr. X, for example, may not necessarily motivate Miss Y, because money is not the motivator always. So what is the motivation? That's the $1 million question. The context will let us know that a person is motivated by what. A person actually gives superior performance because of money. He is paid well. He is given incentives, monetary incentives, or he is rewarded non-monetary wise. There are rewards and recognition programs. There is an appreciation letter to him. There can be many things which motivate people. So basically we have to find out this person is here, his intents, what motivates a person. Traits are nothing, they are words. If you keep studying the literature, there can be a lot of confusing words. Traits are enduring characteristics. Sometimes the word features is also used. Sometimes the word attributes. I've done a lot of study on this. So these are one and the same thing. They are interchangeably used. Let's not get confused into those stuff. Traits are basically characteristics, and I've given examples to make it more clear, like generosity, self-control, devoted, adventurous. Just take a pause and think that whenever you think of your colleagues, or whenever you think of people working in different organizations, don't you think sometimes self-control really determines performance? Don't you think this quality of being devoted, the person is being loyal to a particular task, a person is adventurous? Just think about certain tasks, certain jobs in your mind, maybe human resource manager, maybe production manager, maybe marketing manager, maybe think about different roles. And don't you think sometimes this actually happens? Whenever it comes to group behaviors, whenever it comes to team dynamics, these are of more importance. You know what happens when people are at the operational level? When people are at the operational level, these managerial competencies basically do not come into play much, because they are mostly their operations mostly concerns about skills and knowledge. But when it comes to managing, say, 100 people, when you are the vice president marketing of an organization, then all these managerial competencies of managing people, people management skills, which we call, of developing a team, controlling a team, giving direction to a team, all these competencies become of, they are of paramount importance. That is why, as you move up the hierarchy in an organization, all these competencies are of much, much more importance. That is why that is something very important when we are doing hiring for very senior positions. Then the self-concept, the entire me thing, basically my concept, my attitude, my values. What I value may not necessarily be valued by you, but whatever we collectively value should be in sync with the organization values. If there is a disconnect in hiring, when there are clearly defined values the organization upholds, and we are hiring not in congruence with that, then again there would be a disconnect. So that's why it's very important to understand the person inside out. Basically, all these aspects, the intent of the person, the characteristics of the person, the self-concept, the attitude, all this would determine. Many of you might be knowing lot of people. अरे वो बंदा तो बहुत अच्छा है, उसको बहुत काफी अच्छा नॉलेज है, फॉर एग्जाम्पल. अरे उसको तो काफी जो उसका स्किल सेट भी बहुत अच्छा है, मगर वो बहुत लेजी है. Just giving a very practical example, मगर वो बहुत लेजी है. Don't you think this laziness is going to be a barrier in delivering superior performance? So that laziness, that lackadaisical attitude, that go slow tactics, the kind of being laid back attitude, all these things basically is retarding their progress. So that is why basically we really should be mindful when we are hiring people, when we are evaluating people. For example, there is a manager whose performance review is there. A manager, he achieved his KRA, for example. The numbers are achieved, and numbers can be very misleading. In fact, he achieved his KRA and he basically got appreciation and all that. But when it comes to behavioral aspects and assessment of the behavioral aspects, one of the competencies of a manager is development of the team members. Don't you think it's very important when you have 15 reportees under you, for example, it is your utmost responsibility to develop the team. Now, as we move further, you will see how that particular one competency of development of team is dissected, is disintegrated, and is explained in such great detail that you will get to know there's another chapter within a competency of development of a team member. You have to provide the assistance, you have to provide the resources. You just cannot you cannot work in a hire and fire kind of a system. And a manager is supposed to, in the modern day era, we have modern day managers are expected to play the role of coaches. So are they playing the role of a coach? Are they actually providing the resources? Are they actually helping out individuals? All these behavioral aspects are there. And now if the person is not doing that, and we have an amazing assessment of a 360-degree assessment where the peers and the subordinates and the seniors and even sometimes the customers also rate a particular person. Then we have an aggregate composite score. We get to know the person is actually developing the team member or not. Who knows? Because of the manager, the subordinates performance is getting hampered. To have a fair view, basically we have to dig out all these behavioral aspects and do justice with everybody. I hope everybody is on the same page. Okay, shall I continue?
I just have a question here. May I raise my question?
Yeah. Okay. Yes, please.
So you just mentioned that when we are hiring a person, and if the person has this laid back attitude, then that can become hindrance in managing people, especially at a higher level. Which is very correct. But then does it not depend on the kind of job? I mean, in my opinion, it depends on two things. One, do we are we really I mean, what is the requirement of the job? Maybe the requirement of the job is not a person who is always fast paced, making really quick decisions, and or maybe the job itself requires somebody who is little, not lethargic. Okay, lethargic is not the word, I completely agree, but maybe somebody who is little slow and makes decisions by completely thinking about it and going through all the stuff. And one is that. So in my belief, maybe it depends on the job requirement. And second, doesn't it also depend on the personality? Maybe what I look at as lethargicness is just a personality trait of the person.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Can I respond to you?
Yes, please.
Yeah. You very rightly mentioned, ma'am, about the job itself. So that's why before all these, aspects, we are basically talking about competencies and what comprises competencies. Remember, in order to develop a competency model, that's our ultimate, goal of framing a competency model. I'll show you one competency model at the end of this presentation. Part of the process also requires doing a job analysis and a job evaluation. We need to do a job analysis. We really have to understand the job inside out. And once we are doing that disintegration of the entire job, we also highlight the competencies and the personality traits. So we have to be very careful when we are hiring. Our hiring should match with those personality traits already defined along with the job description, so that there is proper fitment. Now, if the job is of such nature that doesn't require very fast paced, so if you hire that kind of a person, that's okay. But the person, if is actually his laid back attitude gets reflected in group dynamics, that would basically affect the entire culture and slowly poison the entire environment. So basically what I'm saying, even a slight, what you call it, leniency on appointing people with certain traits which can be counterproductive should be avoided. A person who is basically slow, chalega. A person but who is not very fast, chalega. Maybe that's for a very junior kind of a position. You will try to have those training interventions. As it is, the process is such, it's not fast paced. I understand the entire context, because not everybody is fortunate enough to work in very, in Fortune 500 companies with a very fast paced environment. We have to understand. So we cannot expect somebody with those kind of, excellent traits to join us at a double salary, but then leave us within 3 months. That's not possible. So somewhere we have to do the adjustments. But my concern is, let us not allow certain negativities basically to grow out of the job. Sometimes, you basically are concerned about retention of the person. That's fine. But the retention of the person at the cost of the group behavior, at the cost of the poisoning of the environment, because of the attitude, because that attitude spreads. Like we keep saying, no, you are the average of the five people you spend time with. Basically, that's going to be difficult in the future. So that is why our endeavor as much as possible should be to define the competencies, the skills, the knowledge, and the attitudes, the competencies, and basically do a proper check of every competency. All those behavioral interview questions and everything should be duly followed, so that we have the right fitment as much as possible. Any compromise on this is going to backfire, or maybe may have its ripple effect. I hope I've addressed your query.
Yes, thank you so much. Very correctly.
Okay, thank you. I can proceed, Vivek sir?
Yeah, please.
Okay.
Your session, sir. I'm just learning.
Okay. Now let's decode. Already I've decoded. In fact, let's decode further what actually comprises when we say about motives, when we say about traits, and when we say about self-concept. These are nothing but everything, all these behavioral aspects, whether it is the values which people hold, whether it is their perceptions, whether the principles which they uphold, the attitude, the way they look at things, the personality. Of course, when we do psychometric assessments, we also know about the Big Five and all that, all those personality tests. The belief system, okay, how you believe at certain things. The beliefs basically, have an impact on your behavior, the way you look at things. ethics, characteristics, or qualities of people, such as somebody is confident, somebody is aggressive. Just think about certain roles where you really need to be confident. For example, public speaking, right? You really have to be very, very confident. When it comes to being aggressive, you can think of roles where aggression is required. You can think of roles where you really have to be very friendly. For example, the role of a nurse in a hospital. You have to be friendly, you have to be caring, you have to be compassionate. These kind of things. You have to be empathetic, you have to understand the patient. That's how you have to, whenever you are recruiting a nurse, for example, she has passed, she is having that degree, and she knows how to all those technical stuff. But now the behavioral aspect, do you really think, because I was in the hospital, fortunately one of the best hospitals in Guwahati, I can really, I came home and I said the nurses were so good, so caring. I came home because every time she would say, sir, aapko thoda pani chahiye, sir, aapko koi problem hai, sir, aapka blood pressure abhi check karna hai, thoda dekh lete hain, sir, thoda sa. I mean, it was really nice because that kind of a caring. You can't expect all the 100 nurses at a hospital to be of that same type. That's why it's very important. How do you basically bring in people who basically fit in those competencies of a nurse? That's just an example. So you can think about so many other jobs are there. It's a lovely area to explore. Now, I talked about verbs. I talked about skill. When I talked about skill, those are nothing but actions. All those verbs are actions. I wanted to talk a little bit about adjectives. Now, these are some adjectives, I picked up slightly, this is just food for thought. Now, performance of an employee, let's just for an example, think about subjectivity. Subjectivity, when we talk about subjectivity, gets so much reflected, especially in traditional organizations. His performance is good, his performance is bad. He is efficient, he is inefficient. He's a star performer, he's absolutely lazy, he's passionate, he's self-driven. I should also use she. She's flexible, she's adaptable, she's resilient, and she's honest. Okay, that's mindfulness. Thank you, fortunately. So you see, but how do we, in traditional organizations, sir, वो बहुत अच्छा है, वो efficient है, चलो इसको increment इतना दे दो, sir, वो बहुत passionate है, नहीं होता है ऐसे. So basically, you have to basically dissect in what way their laziness gets reflected. Remember, you highlighted the word demonstrable behavior. There's a wonderful technique called STAR technique in behavioral event interviews, where we put a situation, where we put a task, where we do analyze the situation, and we see the results. So there is a STAR technique, abbreviation, situation, task, action, and result. So basically, there are methodologies. It's not a session on basically on assessments today, how we do the assessments. It's just to give you an overview. Otherwise, I can go about discussing 360-degree forms and many other stuff, which is not part of our session today. But to give you an idea, these kind of generalized statements and this kind of subjectivity should be eliminated as much as possible. The attempt and the idea behind competencies is to bring in objectivity. Okay. Now, this is one example of a competency called decision making. One of the pioneers in Indian context happens to be, as you can see at the bottom of the slide, Parikh and Rao. So T.V. Rao, you all know, right? And Parikh and Rao, they came up with a competency dictionary. If you want me, I can share that competency dictionary with you as well, 1992. So they have defined decision making. Now, see, the way they have defined decision making, absolutely brilliant. The ability to weigh all available and relevant facts, to evaluate. Now, you see, ability is to weigh all available and relevant facts, to evaluate various available resources of information, and then determine within a reasonable time the course of action that is to be followed. I was really, overwhelmed. I mean, what a definition they have come up with. See the way they have defined it. Now, as we move further, you will see how this is quantified, how those behaviors are quantified, how an analysis is done, how situations are there, and if you will get to know decision making अच्छा ले लेता है, नहीं होता है. You will see how it is being done, and I'll give you examples of that. Now, before I move further, there is another. If you want to understand competencies in details, do download the competency dictionary of Harvard University. I mean, brilliant is maybe a word which is not enough to describe. See how they have defined Harvard University. That's financial year, I believe, for 2014. Identifies and understands issues, problems, and opportunities, compares data from different sources to draw conclusions, uses effective approaches for choosing a course of action or developing appropriate solutions, takes action that is consistent with available facts, constraints, and probable consequences. Oh my God, decision making was such a simple and light term for me. Now I understand within a particular competency, there is a sea of things, which are involved. Now, if you are really evaluating the performance of an employee on certain parameters, you have to basically highlight from practical work examples whether the person, think of a situation where the person actually identified a problem. He identified his the ability to identify, then the ability to understand the problem and the opportunities associated with the problem, if there are, compares the ability to compare the data from different sources. He can draw inferences, he can draw conclusions, and he uses effective approaches for choosing a course of action or developing appropriate solutions. Don't you think decision making is one competency which, after reading the definition, is of paramount importance when it comes to managers? It is so important. It is so important to understand all these, subtle issues, if I may say so. So that's why how beautifully Harvard University has, defined it. Now you see, I'm moving to another step, which is we have defined the competency. Now, remember, after every competency is defined, how that particular competency gets demonstrated, that is also defined. At different situations, those competencies get defined at different levels in different situations. As we move up, as we move further, you'll get to see how that decision-making intensity enhances. Now you see the behavioral indicators. These are important aspects which we really need to evaluate. Decision making. See, first of all, at one level, he is able to identify the issues. He's able to recognize the issues. As we move to the next step, he gathers information, identifies the need, and collects information to better understand issues. Now, identification was at a simpler level. At a more advanced level, he gathers the information. Third, he has the ability to process the collected information, process the data and information. He is able to interpret correctly. He integrates information from a variety of sources, detects trends and associations. That's at a more advanced level. And finally, is able to generate alternatives. What can be the alternatives in coming to a solution? That's not the end of it. The next slide will tell you that. Okay, see, Harvard University is defining it. Chooses appropriate action. He's able to take action, and he's able to take appropriate action, formulates clear decision criteria, evaluates the options. There are multiple options. Decision tree, you must have studied decision tree and all that. So there are multiple options, basically, which is the best option. He is basically having that ability to decide on the best, decision, so that at minimum cost and minimum utilization of resources, you can achieve the end result. And then commits to action, makes decisions within a reasonable time. Again, time is a yardstick to measure the performance of the person. It cannot be indefinite. And then involves others. At the most advanced level, the person is able to involve the team, include others into the decision-making process. He is able to carry the team together. He is able to put them to, invest their talent into the particular decision making. He gets buy-in and he gets understanding of the resulting decisions. Now you see, if you have to do an assessment of a manager's decision making abilities, and you have these yardsticks and you have these different behavioral indicators and try to relate with situations, don't you think you are doing a fair assessment of the person, isn't it? All right. Now, I really had to respect the wonderful topic given by Vivek sir, the power of competencies. And that's why in my own language, Now I have to do justice to this particular presentation in my own language. This is how I've defined the power of competencies. That's my own language. Many people with amazing skills and enough knowledge fail to perform because with different challenging situations, they fail to demonstrate the interplay of competencies at work, such as quick and correct decision making, risk-taking ability, ability to adapt to volatile scenarios, power of resilience, ability to withstand work-specific storms, quality to deal with ambiguity and uncertainty, courage to face tough situations, ability to predict future trends and challenges, ability to motivate cross-functional teams in meeting the vision of the organization, negotiate towards agreeable terms, resolve conflicts, stay resolute in demanding situations, quality to meticulously plan and flawlessly execute, effectively work in collaboration, being a team player, etc., in varying degrees that their respective roles demand from them. Now, just think, where do we have knowledge and skills in this particular paragraph? I think I see competencies everywhere, whether it is risk-taking, whether it is decision-making, whether it is conflict management, whether it is being resolute, whether it is building a team. You see, these are all competencies. And even because having done business management and all, I really have had to bring in data also to support the claim that we are having. 2015 study, that's long back, by the way. I could not get a latest research finding, sorry, but this is a 2015, but sufficient enough to say you can see the best organizations, the best in-class organizations which achieve highly, within bracket, organizations where staff and management achieve highly, the organizations which really have made a mark as far as performance is concerned, almost 90% of those organizations have their core competencies defined for every role. See how competencies are making a difference in performance, as opposed to 48% for all other companies, which means all other companies, they haven't defined, but 48% of the other companies also have that. Now, this is a study by Deloitte, and you can understand from this small, statistic, basically how important and how powerful the competencies are. And that's why I've written, indeed, it's a real differentiator between good organizations and great organizations, and a competitive advantage for the progressive organizations. Make sense?
Very much.
Now, let's have a look at some of the competencies. I've been discussing about competencies, what are competencies, and how they are powerful. But let's have a look at certain competencies beyond the usual knowledge and skills. Ability to organize, change agent. That's of particular interest to us because HR professionals are supposed to be change agents. Development of others, the ability to motivate others, the ability to develop others, show direction to people, persuasiveness. You really need to persuade them to action. You have to negotiate through tough weather. Basically, in IR role also in industrial relations, this art of negotiation is so critical. When you are in HR, you are a bridge between the employees and the employer. You really have to have those negotiation skills. You are business oriented. You have the business acumen. You are customer focused. You have the analytical ability, and you have the risk-taking ability. Now, think for a moment. Take a pause. Let's take a pause. Think for a moment. Don't you think these are important in determining the performance of an employee? Right? Exactly. Yes, isn't it? So these are the competencies, and they are much, much more. For different job roles, there would be different competencies. And when we do the job analysis and the job evaluation, we will basically have all those competencies listed down. Now, one problem which many people do is they, which I also did, is, we have a long list of competencies. That's not advised. People get confused. Sometimes some competencies appear to be confusing and very similar in their meaning. What you can do is, I will show you a competency model at the end of this presentation, where there is a concept called making competency clusters. Make a cluster, club all the similar competencies under a particular cluster so that you are not confused. Okay, now competencies, as a matter of fact, they are not limited to recruitment and selection. An entire competency HRA, competency-based HRM is being, approach is being followed by progressive organizations, whether it is performance management. We really did a talk about performance and competency. One of the definitions talked about superior performance. So of course, performance management, learning and development, career planning, succession planning. It is of critical importance that we really need to integrate the competency aspects into the entire, all HR verticals, all HR sub-functions. Now think of a situation. Let me know, what do you feel? A company had dogs only as its employees. A new business compulsion required trees to be climbed. So in a meeting, it was decided that there should be a training program for the dogs to train them on climbing. Do you agree or disagree with the decision? May I have some responses, please? Some participation, please.
Definitely will disagree. They cannot climb the trees.
Okay. Any more responses?
We'll apply some AI to it.
Sorry?
Maybe a robotic dog will be.
We'll apply some AI to it.
My dog was just trying to climb on me.
Yeah. So this is just an example. So this is the situation. The decision was sorry, some error there. The decision of the training, the dogs, was communicated to the president. The president had recently attended a seminar on the power of competencies. The president promptly asked, should we not be hiring squirrels? So basically, as per the competency, you have to do the fitment. My interpretation is, as per the job analysis, Satnam map, that's the job analysis I was referring to. As per the job analysis, the role in question, the competency of climbing trees, was identified. The squirrels carry the innate talent. I'm using that word purposely, innate talent, that is competency to climb trees. So this is leveraged by hiring squirrels. Those who are having those talent, those innate qualities, that's required, let's hire them. Now, how do we map the competencies? How do we identify the competencies? How do we dig out the competencies? There are an n number of ways of doing that. One is the behavioral event interview, which is not part of our discussion today. One is the expert panel, which is not part of our discussion today. Employee survey, job analysis, many of us have actually discussed in a lot of our sessions, and existing competency dictionaries. Now, existing competency dictionaries, please go do Google and download Harvard University, highly recommended. SHRM, highly recommended. Parikh and Rao, highly recommended. That's available. If you want me to send you across, I'll do that. Now, once by way of these, we have identified the competencies, we will assess the competencies. Now, this is of great importance. How do you measure the competencies? Two broad approaches are there. One is the 360-degree assessment. This is also called the perception-based assessment. It is perception-based because the peers are rating, the superior is rating, the subordinates are rating. Everybody is having his or her own perception. So 360-degree, it's the form. Sometimes if you want me, I had prepared a form. I can share that form with you as well. The form is to be very intelligently designed in such a way that the competencies are highlighted for that particular person, the incumbent. The knowledge is there, knowledge aspect is there, the skills aspect is there, very much there. But the behavioral aspects are also highlighted. And then all these aspects are basically rated. Usually the Likert scale is used, and the peers and the subordinates, everybody is basically doing the rating. The average weighted score is calculated. And that's how, basically, after that, they have a desired proficiency predefined. कि ये particular role के लिए मुझे ये cut off मेरा है, जो मेरा एक standard है, which is called the proficiency standard of any role. The proficiency standard is defined. Now the assessment is done, the weighted average is calculated. Now you check with the desired proficiency score and the actual score. If there is a gap, of course, we will be having those IDPs. Okay, we will having those training interventions. So this is how the assessment is being done, 360-degree assessment. And of course, the assessment centers usually are an outsourced activity because this requires a very specialized hand. The person should be certified, person should really understand the in and outs of the psychology and the validity of the test. So we have those psychometric tests, group discussions, role plays, case studies, all these kind of activities so that we get a proper and holistic assessment of employees being done. When it comes to development purposes, assessment centers are basically called development centers. So basically, this is how we are. Part of our discussion is today's discussion. We are not discussing about assessment, how assessments are being done, but I just wanted to give an understanding what are the ways assessment of these competencies are done. Now, this is the we are almost coming to the end of the presentation. Once you have a model, once you have a framework of a competency model, how do you say to the world that my model is working, my model is valid? That really calls for again analysis. So there's a lot of learning in the next slide. Please pay attention. Competencies identified through behavioral event interviews of adequate and exemplary performers are statistically analyzed using chi-square test for determining the significant relationship of differentiating competencies. Now, you see, there are certain competencies which are called threshold competencies, which are usually required by everybody. Those are called threshold competencies. And differentiating competencies are competencies which are exclusive to the exemplary performers. What we can do is once we have the data of exemplary and adequate performers, we do a statistical analysis. Usually everything is available on Microsoft Excel. So you run a chi-square test, check the frequency of the data, which actually gets reflected, which competencies are being demonstrated by this group and that group, which are the common competencies, and then establish whether there is a significant relation. You'll get to know that these are actually the competencies statistically proved that these are making a difference in the performance. As simple as that. So, but behavioral event interview, again, understanding BEI requires a lot of investment of time, a lot of study. So that's not part of our discussion. And we are also not going to the calculation part. That's not part of our discussion. But please understand, I have statistically proved that there are certain competencies which have a significant relationship between the usual performers, the adequate group, and the exemplary performers. And I know that these 4 or 5 competencies are basically exclusive to the exemplary performers, and that is statistically proven. Point number 1. Point number 2, I've run a 360-degree assessment at the same time on a freshly drawn sample on all these people, the adequate and the exemplary, everybody. The 360-degree assessment will also give me some scores with regard to all the competencies held by the different people. Now, once we have the, as I said earlier, we have the desired proficiency and we have the actual scores. We know the gaps. Now, basically, we will also try to correlate this 360-degree assessment scores with the findings of the BEI. We will see whether there is a correlation between the two. Third, KRA scores. A person is hired, the annual appraisals are done, and let's see what are the appraisal results. We'll also try to correlate the KRA scores with the 360-degree data. We will also correlate it with the BEI data. Then comparing the competency scores at the time of hiring with the appraisal scores. At the time of interviews, we are following the competency model of hiring. We have the interview scores, and then we have the appraisal scores. And once again, we'll see whether our competency-based hiring is actually leading to effective performance in the way of getting reflected in the appraisal scores. Which means if there is a strong correlation, then we can happily conclude that our model is valid. We cannot say that we have a model which is really working, we have a competency model. In India, sadly, most of the organizations are not having a competency model. Most of the organizations are in the unorganized sector, forget having competency models. But at least where there are no competency models and where we are there as educated people, it is our responsibility, and we should try our best to, to have those frameworks. And it's not merely having those frameworks, but to prove it to the management that these are this is the data and the information and the correlation statistically and mathematically proved with the appraisal scores, that you have a valid model, and then you can basically work with confidence. That is how testing the validity of a competency model. I wanted to show you a competency model which is easily available in the internet, which is of Oil India Limited. You go Google and you can download it. So you see how they have defined a particular competency, teamwork. So you see how they have defined. The sequence is this. First of all, you have to do a job analysis and job evaluation and try to find out the competencies, the mapping of the competencies. Once you have successfully done the mapping of the competencies, you will basically define each competency. And you really have to be very strong as far as your command in English is concerned when you have to define, because this is something, there should not be ambiguity, and the message should be across the organization. The competency dictionaries have to be made in that way. To see how beautifully they have defined, teamwork implies the intention to work cooperatively with others. There is an intent, that motive comes into the picture. There is an intent to be part of a team. I want to be part of this team, the sense of belongingness, to work together, as opposed to working separately or competitively. This is something which really ails in a lot of organizations, in traditional organizations, where there is a lot of organization politics. People either work separately, either they appear to be physically working in a team, but emotionally and psychologically they are not connected, they are disconnected, and there is a spirit of competitiveness. There's a sense of insecurity. So when we are appraising the manager and the seniors, we really have to integrate into the evaluation system. Basically, are they helping their subordinates? Are they lifting their people up? Are they providing all the resources? And not only one person would say that if it is a 360-degree assessment, it would be a fairer assessment and a more precise and accurate assessment when it is a multi-rater assessment. So that's beautifully defined teamwork. And now you see the behavioral, the levels of teamwork. Now this is amazing. This really calls for a lot of study. This really calls for a lot of intelligence, how you are defining the levels of teamwork. Level 1, cooperates and shares information. So you are a manager, you have 15 reportees under you. So you are cooperating and sharing information. I just want to save time. Level 2, expresses positive expectations. You are setting the expectations very clearly. Third, you are soliciting inputs. You want people to participate. Give me inputs, we are a team, we need to work together. 4, makes others feel strong and capable. That's basically the coaching part comes into the play. As you move higher up in the levels, the coaching parts get reflected. He publicly credits others who have performed well. So he is basically playing the role of a coach. Encourages. Level 5, builds positive team climate. The overall climate of the team is being built by the gentleman, right? Number 6, works to resolve team conflicts. If there are conflicts, he basically works to resolve those conflicts. This is defined very clearly in the competency model of Oil India Limited. Now, I was talking about the sequence. We have done the mapping. We have to define very clearly, and then we have to define the behavioral indicators level after level. And finally, we have to come up with the proficiency standard. Now, for Oil India, for a particular level, for example, an officer grade level, what is the level? What is the desired proficiency standard you want to set? So that's your call. The management will decide. So it can be level 3, it can be level 5. For a very senior position, it would obviously be, goes without saying, it would be level 6. So have a look at the competency model. This is one small, page which I picked up. This is the Oil India competency framework. See how they have made the clusters. how they have made the clusters. Committed purpose is one cluster. Once you are committed, so and the competency again, committed purpose is written, achievement orientation. Achieving business results, you can see how they have defined. Influences and leads others, team leadership, impact and influence. I can see how the different competencies are being listed down. Then number of levels are nothing but those behavioral indicators, different levels, okay? Different levels. So for committed purpose, 4 levels are there. Achieving business results, 7 levels are there. And for that particular competency, now they have different grades. You can see E, F, G. So, for a particular grade, for example, E grade, the 1 is okay. 1 is the desired proficiency level, which means it's a junior position. And for another grade, it can be 2, it can be 3, it can be 4, and it goes on. So that's how they have defined this metrics. Once, when it comes to hiring, they have to basically hire somebody who fits into that desired proficiency level. Otherwise, it's a strict no call to hire people. When it comes to promoting people, when it comes to developing IDPs, the idea, the target is to achieve that desired proficiency level. If no, training interventions are required. I think that I have come to the end of it. Thank you so much for being active listeners. Thank you. We can connect on LinkedIn, those who are not connected. And my special thanks to Vivek sir. And of course, another gentleman who had helped me to understand competencies, Dr. Anitya Basu, who happens to be a visiting faculty of XLRI and SIIS WBM, and my dearest Skill Up family. Thank you so much. I'm open for questions.
Atif, you were continuous for 60 minutes. For me, it was too high.
But a brilliant presentation. Atif.
Yes.
It shows the kind of work that you have done to collate this information and do the research. And that was impressive, and I am sure everyone would have got benefited with it.
Absolutely. I'm actually spellbound. All I can say is I'm actually spellbound.
Actually, every slide I was checking those competencies in myself. But I have a question actually. Something was,
Atif, can you just switch off this share?
Yeah. Yes,
sir, when we speak about innate qualities, something very funny came across me, the circus. Even though lion, we know what is the innate quality, we know dog's innate quality. They have been trained to, ride a cycle, cross a fireball, jump over a ring and all. So, in human beings also, why can't we think that innate qualities, are not exactly applicable when it comes to a job?
Atif, can I please?
Yeah, please.
Sangeeta, there is something called purpose as well. In corporate,
that's what I said, very fun.
In corporate world also, so-called competencies are created, and you will see there are managers who prefer having those yes mans.
I think the performance management system is the chabuk
and
the circus.
and they create like that,
Yeah.
where we need those kind of people. But yes, in short, if we are talking about performance as a whole, we need to identify what is needed and why. In one of the slide where Atif mentioned, I think he was talking about assessment center where a third party agency or an external agency. In fact, competency is also preferably has to be done by a third party agency because of that unbiased view that brings in. Imagine these leaders developing a competency framework. The focus shifts from organization to their own purpose. And this is where, to have an unbiased view.
If I may also
respond
to the query raised by ma'am. Ma'am, animals are animals, they can be trained, but they do not have the cognitive abilities, and they do not have those, emotional intelligence and the mix of those emotions which humans have, which again, it becomes very difficult. I mean, and it's better to stick to those, the innate stuff, and try not to push people into doing something which is not part of their nature, I would say.
Acha, before further more questions, can I request each one of you to switch on the video? We can see each other, especially there are some new members. That would be, and then we can have a better conversation.
I don't know. I perhaps might look very shabby right now because I was cooking dinner.
That's fine,
problem.
we can understand.
Yeah,
A
really,
Sunday,
really
a
sorry for
Sunday
that.
evening,
It's
a
Sunday
busy evening.
evening. Yeah, it's
We can
Sunday evening.
understand.
But
We just wanted to add a face to the name.
yeah,
And
sure.
I thought,
Yes, thank you. And I just would like to say thank you
sure.
so very much. This was amazingly insightful session. Being a trainer myself, it's very difficult to sit for an hour long without speaking. But I didn't realize how the complete 1 hour went, because I had understanding of these things in small bits and pieces. But then the way he has put in everything together in a very, very structured and contextual manner, it was amazing and a really good learning. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's awesome to hear.
Thank you.
Others can have some. Let's hear from you all how you felt. Krishna, Ruby, Sushmita.
I'll go ahead.
Yeah, Sushmita, you can start.
So first and foremost, it was a very enlightful session. I came to know in depth about what is competency and how does the structuring and framework goes across. The example of the animals, which I really liked it, but later the twist and the answer was very much fun. But yes, it was a highlighting moment that yes, for a particular role, you need to hire a particular person. You cannot hire any as that for that matter. So I really like that. And yes, also the insightful what you have shared, it is really, really great. So yes, that was like, a brainstorming, but in an impactful.
Great, Sushmita.
Thank
Hi,
you.
Sushmita. There is another Sushmita today.
Hi. Thank you, Atif. Actually, I'm a very, very young professional. I got your message in one of the WhatsApp groups and I
Oh,
thought I'll just
wonderful.
log in and see. Yeah. So currently I'm working at Glenmark. I'm from Assam and I was actually kind of working on a competency framework. And I had few questions like while the session was wonderful, very, very engaging, and I got some good inputs from, I'll connect with you. I'm very sure about it regarding the same. But just wanted to understand one thing, if you can throw some light on that, like in India, as I've already said that, as organization, there's a lot of resistance from business. We are trying to implement something like this. So any top of your head suggestion or advice that comes to your mind when we, how do we convince the business people to, accept or embrace such a framework that we as HR partners, we try to, give to the organization?
You have to, thank you, Sushmita, for your lovely comments. Thank you for the appreciation. I would say basically you can put across that, that one thing which really pains everybody, which is about subjectivity in decision makings. In order to have a fair assessment of the performance of people, you really have to quantify the qualitative aspects as much as possible. इनको बताओ आप कि भाई जस्टिस करना है, हर एक एम्प्लॉय के साथ जस्टिस करना है. Every person deserves, and that is justice is one value which we should uphold. And इसीलिए कहीं पे भी ये subjectivity रहेगा तो भाई आपको प्रॉब्लम हो जाएगा. Numbers, as Vivek sir also says, numbers, KRA, sometimes those are achieved, those can be very misleading, those can be manipulated. Don't go by strict numbers of achievement of KRAs. Don't go by the depth of the knowledge the person has. In reality, the person can have a very different face. That's why get a very objective assessment done. 360-degree assessment is one thing which you can really try for and check out the results. Push for justice. Push for this. Hopefully, I think this should be accepted.
Hi, Sushmita.
We'll connect.
Let me add it here, Sushmita, because
Sure.
I have been a part of one such transition, and yes, it's there would be a lot of resistance, especially when it comes from the management. Because it needs a lot of changes, and you need to showcase the results. You need to demonstrate, what are the gray areas and how these competencies, the first and foremost is a complete buy-in from the management.
Correct.
At times it may so happen that they can, okay, fine, you try it. When it comes to the real implementation, and there lies the challenge. And we have done this, and it was a humongous task. Defining all these things were easy. The difficult task was to get buy-in, complete buy-in from the management.
Right.
Yes, because this
Exactly.
is going to revamp the whole thing. And there would be a lot of resistance from the lot of employees as well. So this is where, a tough time would be there to getting the buy-in of that. But then you need to showcase. You need to highlight why these problems are there and how they can be resolved.
Correct.
And I hope it helps you.
We'll try.
Please, all the best.
Yes.
Yeah, Varsha.
Thanks. Yes.
Thank you, Satnam. I think Satnam is leaving. Chal, anyways. Yeah, Varsha.
Atif, congratulations. What a brilliant presentation. So beautifully put.
Thank you.
Well researched, the content, the delivery. I mean, it was a complete package. Please consider this as a standing ovation, please.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
much
Thank you.
respect
Thank you.
and more power to
Thank
you,
you.
because there are very few presenters and who actually gives you a complete information of a topic and leaves you with that's that sense of satisfaction that, I mean, ek ghanta ho gaya and you don't even realize, and there's so much more that you want to know about this topic, and there's so much, I mean, I always thought that competency is something that I've got a little hold of, and now I realize, my God, there's so much more to it. But the way you've presented the topics that you've covered, you've added so much value, you've added so much, information to us. So thank you so much for it. I'm so glad that
My
I could be
pleasure.
a part of it. And
My pleasure.
kudos, man. Well done. Very good.
Well done.
Thank
yeah.
you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Varsha. Thanks for participating.
Atif bhai, I just have one thing to say. I think one line that comes to my mind at this point of time is "Wah tera kya kehna." That's something I would like to say. And I just have one question. So you talked about behavioral event interviews. So now what often happens that people often take stress interviews. So that actually demonstrates that is a way of, getting a demonstration of, your behavior. So, so when we talk about stress interviews and when we talk about behavioral event interviews, so are these things synonymous, or are these things different with this? Yeah, that's what I want to understand.
Not at all. Not at all. Not at all. BEIs basically pick up 6 stories. 3 high points in life in the sense from the work life, and 3 low points from the work life. And every story is basically coded by specialized coders who would basically code. It is the transcripts, the way the person highlights or narrates the stories are actually the transcripts go on being recorded, written, exactly the same wordings. And then the transcripts are processed into codes, and the competencies are being referred from the competency dictionaries. So this is something which the past is being called. Events are being reiterated by the person. So one of the limitations of BEI is the power of recall of the persons who are being interviewed. One of the limitations, but it's not a stress interview.
No, but my question is, how is it different from a stress interview? Because in stress, when like there are
stress interviews, you create a situation, you put a situation in front of the person, and you expose him to a stress. That's a created environment. But in BEI, it's not a created environment. It is from his own work life, because we want to see in the past from his work life what kind of behavior he demonstrated in his work life. And that demonstration is basically again coded, and then we do the statistical analysis.
And also one more thing. So for example, let's say if someone is transitioning into a career, okay, let's say if for example, I'm transitioning from marketing to human resources. but I may not, like, suppose there are certain competencies like, decision making, cooperation, helping out others. I may not have demonstrated that in my professional life, but I may have demonstrated those qualities in my personal life. So if I give those examples when my interview is being conducted, so will that be taken into consideration, or it's only strictly professional?
I do think in BEIs, personal things are given space, because whatever study I've done, is always confined to the work life. And for freshers and people inexperienced, obviously we have to adopt other approaches as far as possible, I believe.
Okay.
I think Krishna had to add something.
Yeah.
Yeah, please.
Well, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thanks, Atif, for presenting it very well, and the in-depth of the competencies and briefing the behavioral indicators and the parameters on what basis we have to, define the competencies. It was an in-depth knowledge. Like, thanks, you gave me the link, and you said that to attend the session.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vivek sir, for sending the link too.
My pleasure.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. Thank you.
We have Aditi here after a long time.
Hi.
Hi Aditi,
Hi,
how are
good
you?
evening. I'm fine, sir. So, like Atif, the session was so good and the learning was so smooth. I was just listening, and I don't have any questions because I understood. Sir also gave the session of the competency, so I just love the session. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aditi. But it
Welcome.
was nice seeing you after a long time.
Same here, sir.
Ishrat, anything to add? Anything to ask?
I'll first congratulate Atif and all our skill hubbers. Actually, I was waiting for this session for the last month itself. But I think that Bahubali in making was there.
Correct.
So Atif, what I just like to suggest one thing, we should go forward on this session itself. Like metric part was there, and even this competency cluster, the new thing that I have learned today. Though I have gone too many things, but what I think that we should go ahead with one more session. I can request you so that we can assimilate all these metrics in the concluding session. Like Bahubali 1 was there, now Bahubali 2 is waiting for you. Yeah.
The ball is in Vivek sir's court.
Yeah, it seems it will be
Sir, Sunday session is your session.
Yes.
But I
just have to facilitate.
Atif, the way
I need to buy some time.
Atif, the way you have presented and everybody's expectations have gone high on the next presentation. Now I'm scared.
No, I was really speechless. Listening to the last 1 hour without uninterrupted way means he's so meticulously we have done. So that's why Bahubali 2 should be there.
Now
will help you out.
Now this is a parameter set. Next Sunday is Sangeeta with
That's what I'm scared now. They've elevated the presentation. Expectations.
No. I'm sure.
Because what I'm preparing is purely from my point of experience.
That is what we want. And the load of experience that you bring with you. I'm sure each one of us will learn from it. The way you have handled situation, the way you are doing it, single-handedly, it's commendable. So I think it was a lovely evening. I think now
Ujjwal is left, sir. Ujjwal.
Yes, Ujjwal को कैसे भूल गए?
Ujjwal sourcing में busy था, अभी भी वो sourcing कर रहा था.
नहीं सर, मैं एक्चुअली ध्यान से सुन रहा था आदित्य सर का पूरा एक्सप्लेनेशन. इट वाज ऑसम.
सोए तो नहीं थे ना?
नहीं सर, सच्ची.
हाँ, तब ठीक है.
सोएगा. Yeah, it was awesome. लेकिन I should read it first. क्योंकि थोड़ा सा भूल गया हूँ जो पढ़ा था, बट अपार्ट फ्रॉम दैट आतिफ भाई PPT will be added advantage.
He'll share, don't worry.
Yeah.
We'll get that.
Of course.
और संगीता मैम का नेक्स्ट वीक संगीता मैम का प्रेजेंटेशन है ना?
I'm
life of a
recruitment and
sourcer.
hiring. Sourcing.
Life of a sourcing agent.
It's like a life of a pie only, always in the middle of the sea.
And उसके you know
With a
creative में
hole in the
photo,
boat.
उसके creative में photo आपका आएगा.
Sangeeta ma'am's presentation, we are eagerly waiting, ma'am.
Yes, we are.
Yes. Indeed.
I'm just done with the 4 slides. I'm yet to add more.
Will be done.
Chalo then, guys, it was a great evening.
Yes,
And
indeed.
see you all next Sunday.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you to
To
each one
Atif,
of you.
thank you,
to
everyone.
each one of you for investing your time and actively listening to me and those words of encouragement and appreciation. I just love you all as my Scale Up family. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Atif. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.
everyone.
Bye.